No idea if this works. Probably no viewers as well, so let's see if I can edit. Title and description while I'm live, yeah, that's okay. War and Peace. I'll leave it at that. I have no idea if I'm going to leave this one up. I have no idea how YouTube takes someone just publishing a lot of content. I have no idea how far a message will go, even if someone finds this in retrospect. Yeah, I'm live with evil alt-right side. Yeah, I get my news from all over the place. Let's go to Wikipedia again. I've done some tiny videos on BitChute, and I've pondered these things for a long time, and I do claim my right to have an opinion about these things because I was once part of the Cold War. I did my duty. I was in the Signal Corps. I was way up north. Oh, I'm doxing myself. Whatever the fuck. I was probably quite up way north. The Cold War, it was very real. What I've been living through now, is it another Cold War? Well, it's certainly hot. And it's certainly worse than probably any point of history, on and off. So let's see what this very skewed Soros says. The Cold War is a period of global geopolitical rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Well, Europe was a big part of it. It was not only the US and their respective allies. Yeah, you can argue what was the source of all of this and who turned against the Soviet Union that was a formal ally of the West. Lasted from 1947 until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. This is the point. I remember that. And those who have a memory, those who have some experience, have a duty to speak up about things, to talk about things, to draw these lines that go way back. It says here that it was a period of global geopolitical rivalry between the US and the US Soviet Union and respective allies, the capitalist Western Bloc and the communist Eastern Bloc. Well, was the West really capitalist with central banking and fiat, and especially after 1971? Was the Eastern Bloc? Well, it was certainly what communism is. What most people think about communism, know about communism, it was certainly that, because it was messed up and dangerous as hell. Warning. Am I being nuked already? Are my opinions illegal already? Bitrate lower than a recommended bitrate. Well, I'm coming through fuzzy and messed up. We're in a new Cold War. I was part of the Signal Corps, and we had a very advanced system, a distributed system, a system of nodes, same principle as the internet, where if my ass was bombed, then our installation was obliterated. The communication would still be going through. I've been in this kind of tech since even back then. The Cold War is used because there was no direct fighting between the two superpowers. Well, there were proxy fights. So each supported opposing sides in regional conflicts, known as proxy wars. We are at a stage now when that is more obvious than ever. In addition to the struggle for ideological and economic influence and an arms race in both conventional and nuclear weapons, the Cold War was expressed through technological rivalries such as the space race, espionage, propaganda campaigns, embargoes, and sports diplomacy. Well, you not only got propaganda campaigns now, you got propaganda tech. AI is going to take care of propaganda, and it's like people are scared, witless all over the place. It's very hard to, back then it was very hard to imagine a climate where everyone could be surveilled and mapped and tracked and fingerprinted like this. It was possible to imagine a scenario where we were not able to speak freely, because this is what we fought for. This is the two or three reasons that I did my duty in the army in 88 and 89 is that, one, I could not lie about the fact that I would be non-violent under any condition. I've reserved myself as a teenager the natural right to defend my own life and people in my family and friends. If something really bad happened, yeah, I could not go through the police interrogation. That was actually part of the routine then. If you claim to be a pacifist, you would have to go through an actual interrogation by the police. And one of the things you really had to get right is that when they asked you if you would avoid violence under any circumstances, you had to say yes. I couldn't do that. The other thing is that I didn't want to be a coward, because some people sneakily made their way out of it. And ultimately, of course, what was underlying all of this, there was something to fight for. There was freedom of speech, there was freedom of movement, there was freedom of... You were free to make a living. No one asked you for if you had registered for this or that. You could set up an informal business. This is completely impossible in the West now. You could get started in anything. You just talk to people and they pay you, and you're like, oh, it was legal. It was even legal to sort out the tax matters later. Well, now in my home country, I can't even. It is impossible and illegal to even start a sole proprietorship using cash. One of the reasons I left. Until the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The thing is, it was at the tail end, so the main discussion inside of the camp, the people who actually put their lives potentially on the line, we had a NATO alert once, and not even the camp commander knew why we were supposed to stay in the camp until further notice, ready to go at any moment. It was spooky. Where well, back then, it was real. And one of the things we discussed, besides if we could trust our own officers, was, well, can it go hot? Can we trust these people? Can we trust Gorbachev? Like the higher levels already did, because a lot of the operations were winding down and things were getting a little bit lax even into like early 89. But it's real. I was part of it. And a friend, a good friend, but not a frequent friend, like someone I knew well from growing up, he was right up against the Soviets, just probably tens of, like a few yards away at the worst. And he didn't want to talk about it. He was the most even-keeled, happy, careless person ever, never had a problem. Came into a lot of money first from his family and then doing a really great career later. And never stressed about a single thing, but he didn't want to talk about that period. He was still spoke years later, and then ultimately he was ended up stone cold dead, out skiing, stone cold dead from a certain medical procedure, I'm sure. The world is always a dangerous place, and the dangers are so radically different now. This is one of the things, this is the reason I'm talking about this on a channel that is going to be more about technology, about privacy and security, and how to forge a way through the modern climate and the modern jungle, which is technocratic and technological in nature. Back then it was highly manual. I lived most of my years then without having a phone. I got my mobile phone early in 91, actually, 92. But everything was manual, everything was offline. I'm still very good at living offline, navigating offline, no problem. But no one could imagine a climate where you're not allowed to say what you feel like, what you want. We could imagine a climate where we were actually overrun and occupied, and there would be like foreign soldiers on every street corner, and because this is a memory going back to the war in Europe, where you had to know if you could you trust this distant relative talking freely. Some people fucked up. Most found a way, and towards the end of the war in Europe, most people, it was kind of like open knowledge. Like many people had like maps where they literally mapped the front lines and things. But it was all offline. Now everything is online. I've just done a tiny video on AI, on BitChute, and just doing that. I'm already an enemy of the technocratic state, and it's ludicrous, it's unacceptable, but it's still something that everyone has to deal with. And I had to deal with it. I'm going back to Europe for a short stint. I'm going to juggle different jurisdictions. I'm going to forge a way of setting up a tiny sole proprietorship company again. I'm going to get myself going, and my body is literally falling apart. It's been a wild ride. But I think ultimately that the experiences from back then, the values, what I literally, it was not voluntary, it was mandatory, but I could have spent all of my energy on avoiding it or protesting against it. I actually kind of wanted to just refuse both taking part in the Cold War and refusing to answer any questions during a police interview, and then you literally spend a year in jail. I kind of wanted that. I kind of admired the people who did it, but I didn't feel grown enough. I didn't feel mature enough to do that. Will I do it now? I don't know. Just something to consider. Would I resist by any means what's going on in Europe now? What would I be doing for some years? Would I try to aid anyone in the countries that are the hardest hit in Europe by, if there is conscription, when there is conscription, when there is a collapse, and when things get really rough? Would I hire anyone up against that digital beast? Anyone resisting the digital gulags? Taking a personal risk? Oh, yeah, of course. I would not enjoy so, but gotta be on the right side of history and humanity, basically. Finally, yes, Gorbachev reform. I remember when they started printing these things, and there was like a lot of intellectuals. They were like so happy about communism finally maybe being right. It runs so deep. Perestroika, glasnost. it doesn't belong in this channel, but it's a good backdrop. Was the Soviet Union dismantled so that it could be moved, the whole project of full centralized totalitarian control could be moved into the EU, and that those organs, maybe, probably, that is what we are up against now, that's for sure. Yeah, in '89, the Soviet withdrew from Afghanistan, and that happened in. It started on the 15th of May '88. That's when I was in boot camp, so that explains in retrospect a lot about the gradual dismantling of the complete effort I saw during that year. Finished on the 15th of February '89. Well, then I was up against them. 3rd of December '89, Gorbachev and Bush declared the Cold War over at the Malta summit. I do remember that. I was out of the army then. I was studying. I didn't know that universities were completely overrun by Marxists. That became clear a couple of years ago. In February, Gorbachev agreed with the US for a treaty of final settlement of respect to Germany. Well, this is where everything is buried now. I don't think I'm going to say too much about that because my focus is on the practicalities of surviving and dealing with all of this shit, so I'm not going to go too much into it. Yeah, German reunification. I remember well when the wall fell. I had just got my student grant and loan, so I was rich. And I was sitting there watching my black and white television, seeing this happening in the afternoon, and I was thinking, oh, but I should get all of that in cash. Fuck my future in the university. I'll get all of that cash. I'll jump in a taxi, I'll go to the airport, I'll just see what plane is leaving when to anywhere close, and I'll just get there. I would have been there in the morning the day after, I think. And it would have been unforgettable. I would have brought my camera. I would have been a photographer having real pictures from the wall coming down. I would have been someone. In retrospect, I now realize that I've always been doing wild things because I didn't go to see the fall of the wall. I did the sensible thing of keeping my student grant and loan on cozy in my account, and well, I did a year of English. It was fine. It was not directly infused with Marxism. That particular subject was not completely usurped. It was colored in all different ways of course, by this thing. Anyway, now I'm watching the new wall being erected, and I'm outside of it. Everyone in Europe are inside, on the outside. I was in a student newspaper in '89. Late '89, I got into a student newspaper and I started learning digital publishing, and we got a laser printer, and I was doing darkroom work, and we did some really good publishing, and I learned how to deal with deadlines, doing like 4 times 20 hours on average. And we also did one thing. We donated some of the electrical typewriters that were had been used up until the previous year to students inside of the Iron Curtain in Hungary, a country I know quite well. I've been there 18 times. My ex was from Hungary. I've spent probably something like a year spread across 5 years inside of Hungary, and I've talk to the family and like friends, like how was it in those times and blah blah blah. And it was obviously after the wall fell, many years, at 2007 the first time, but you get to see a lot. And Hungary was the happiest camp in the barracks. It was the country where people in the Soviet Union and inside of the Iron Curtain were allowed to go for a holiday. It was an outlet. It was like a steam pressure release valve. And it was also the first country that opened their borders towards the West. And then everyone could fake an application for a holiday in Hungary, or they just went. And that was one of the reasons why it was impossible to keep the wall going. So, but why was Hungary the happiest camp, happiest barracks in the camps or behind the Iron Curtain? It was because they fought the fiercest. They fought a really, really hard battle in '56. So the repression, the regime was not really able to completely control every tiny single aspect. Everything was, it was the same regime in practical purposes, and everything was surveilled the same way as in like DDR, but they were allowed a certain amount of freedom. You even had I might be sharing some wonderful music, because you even had like this hippie boom in the late 60s in Hungary. Some of that music is great, wonderful. But they were allowed that because they fought back hard. And we see the same now in Europe. The nations that fight back hard are going to be the ones who set the future. Belongs to those nations in Europe that fight hard. And I feel sure that I would be more welcome in and understood in countries that fight hard to keep their freedom, like Slovakia and Hungary and maybe Italy, maybe part of Italy. It's complex. I haven't been to Europe for quite a few years. I haven't traveled in a deep and expensive way. Like I've always had this thing about if I get into anything, I always kind of get deep into it, and I get a lot of info that most people haven't got, and I remember it, and I'm able to relate it later. I don't even understand it myself, but this is where we are. And if it's a new Cold War, if it's a new Iron Curtain, it's in terms of technocracy, it's totally a new Iron Curtain. Look at this. Look at this evil loser. I've been to the hospital where he was interned after the fall of the Berlin Wall. These people were... DDR is a very interesting case because they were totally out of touch. If you search for Stasi here, you'll find some interesting facts. Fall of the Soviet Union. Recruitment of informants became increasingly difficult toward unification, and after 1986 there was a negative turnover rate of IMs. Well, they recruited like a huge section of, I can't remember, it was like 30% of the population were informants, but after the perestroika and glasnost, that rate plummeted. Is it a significant impact on Stasi's ability to survey the populace in a period of growing unrest? Yeah, there were. I did some photography for an article in late summer '89 where someone was studying in Eastern Germany, and she had seen some of the student riots up close, and that happened right before all of the events started. Knowledge of Stasi's activities became more widespread. Yeah, that's it. That's the thing. the truth was out in the open, as it is with the EU and Europe now. Stasi had been tasked during this period with preventing the country's economic difficulties becoming a political problem. I've said this for years. The reason why people are not totally rebelling in Europe is because there is food in the stores, or food bugs. Through suppression of the very worst problems the state faced, but it failed to do so. It failed. The thing is, even the leadership had no idea what was going on. They really didn't understand that it was over. It lasted for a little while. When the Parliament of Germany investigated public funds that disappeared after the fall of the Berlin Wall, yeah, well, they stole everything, of course. It found out that East Germany had transferred large amounts to something called Martin Schlaff through accounts in Vaduz, the capital of Liechtenstein, in return for goods under Western embargo. Moreover, high-ranking Stasi officers continued their post-GDR careers in management positions in Schlaff's group of companies. For example, in 1990, Herbert Kohl, a Stasi commander in Dresden, transferred 170 million marks to Schlaff for hard disks, and months later went to work for him. I didn't know this. The investigation concluded that Schlaff's empire of companies played a crucial role in the Stasi attempt to secure the financial future of Stasi agents and keep the intelligence network alive. Well, it all fell apart. During the peaceful revolution of 1989, Die Wende, I remember that, Die Wende. One of the peaceful revolution of 89, at the peak of the collapse of the Eastern Bloc in the late 80s, a process of socio-political change led to, among other, opening of borders. Yeah, Stasi officers and prisons throughout the country were occupied by citizens, but not before the Stasi destroyed a number of documents. They only managed to destroy 5% because there were mountains of these. And now the project of assembling these shredded files is still going on. I think they've started using AI in that work now. Yeah, here's the link for that. Some article in Wired, 2008. Well, it was maybe not communist by then. Consisting of, by one calculation, 1 billion sheets of paper. Yeah. I mean, the server farms of the West, it's the same now. The amount of data is totally unmanageable. They're going to have AI sorting through it, but yeah, it's just insane. Yeah, I remember this when they started shredding all of the papers in the Stasi headquarters. There was a demonstration outside, and they entered peacefully. Basically, the leadership had to give up. Sturm auf die Stasi-Zentrale, Berliner Morgenpost. Not only surveillance and sacking all my data, subscription file. Doesn't matter. I remember. Yeah, people were worried that they wanted to know what was in their personal file, because by now everyone knew that they had a file. Many of which would supply important evidence in convicting those who had committed crimes for the Stasi. Yeah, ordinary people who had not given in to being an IM, of course, wanted to know who was. They wanted to know, was my neighbor an agent after all? Why did I end up in jail for 2 years in 1975? Was it someone in my family, or was it something with the work? People wanted to know. Yeah, they tore down the portraits of Erich Honecker and Erich Wilke, of course. Some Stasi employees were thrown out of upper floor windows and beaten after falling to the streets before below whatever, no deaths or serious injuries. Well, I can't condone that, and I won't recommend that particular thing, but we'll have to see what needs to happen in Europe. Eric Mielche doesn't seem to have a entry, which is weird. Oh, maybe there's just the link that lacked. Minister for State Security. This is the head guy of Stasi. In office from 1957 to 89. There's a lot of skullduggery and nefarious things here, of course. I didn't even know all these things. Maybe I'll read into it. Toppling Honecker came first. The party leadership and the Stasi thought that they would be able to hang on. November 7 1989, Mielche resigned along with 11 out of 18 members of SED, that was the party, a council of ministers responsible to increasing disintegration of the GDR. Well, it all fell apart. Europe and all the EU will fall apart, so this is why this is relevant. 2 days later, Schabowski announced on television that the east-west border was opened without restriction. Yeah, I didn't remember that, so it was the 9th of November 89 that I was close to going to see it. Panic at the Stasi headquarters. Yeah, I remember this. Shredded the file until the paper shredders overheated and shorted out. They burnt their paper shredders. There was a shredder shortage. Communism, shredder shortage. So, and they had to send agents out undercover to West Berlin to buy more. So the failing Stasi, the failing DDR, the failing state, communist state, the workers' paradise, sent agents to West Berlin to buy more shredders. It's hilarious. Yeah, we started using scissors to cut the documents, but I think a lot of those remains are even just torn by hand. Televised humiliation. I can't remember if I saw that. On 30 November 1989, Mielche was summoned to deliver a briefing about the protests to the GDR, Volkskammer, formerly a rubber-stamped parliament. This happened towards the end, like some of these rubber stamp, like it says here, parliament. Some of these entities that were part of the legal setup of these illegal states didn't have any formal power, but they actually started grabbing back some power or taking some power or being an actor in this play. Therefore, Mielche, as the head of the Stasi, was summoned before the newly empowered parliament to justify his position in government. There will come a time in the EU when some of these functionaries will experience being treated in a totally different way that they ever expected, kind of falling on their own, not falling on their own swords, but stumbling in some of the regulation they set up themselves way back. As his speech was broadcast live, Mielche began by using overly bombastic flag-waving language. Yeah, blah, blah, comrades. I remember this. He claimed that the secret services of the Stasi have an extraordinarily high amount of contact with all working people. This is a direct parallel to what's going on now. I bet the organs of the EU claim that they have a very good take on what ordinary people in the EU think and have as priorities and their values, I bet, especially in Romania. To his shock, the Volkskammer responded with boos, whistles, and catcalls, so his face grief-stricken and pale. Mielke then tried to defuse the situation. Yes, we have such contact, let me tell you. Let me tell you why. I'm not afraid to stand here and give you an unbiased answer. Ja, wir haben den Kontakt. Ihr werdet gleich hören. Ihr werdet gleich hören, warum? Ich fürchte mich nicht. Und redet bitte schon, Ihre Antwort zu scheren. Mielke continued speaking of the triumph of the social economy, continuing all the while to address the members of the Volkskammer as comrades, Genossen. In response, Volkskammer member Dietmar Zorc of the Christian Democratic Union, I can't remember the links between the East and West when it came to the CDU, but if the CDU was elected into the Volkskammer in the 80s, probably, rose from his seat and raised his hand. The Volkskammer president, Günther Mailer, interrupted Mielke and with his voice dripping with contempt, talked to Mielke. As a point of order, I will not tell you this again. There are more people sitting in this chamber than just your comrades. In response, many of the Volkskammer burst into applause, cheers, and shouted, "We are not your comrades. Wir sind nicht deine Genossen." This is the breaking point. This is a breaking point that's happening now culturally in a lot of Europe. When I'm not gonna even use any of these words because I think most people will know. These spells where you're not allowed to use certain words and you should use some words, and if you're not, you're a blah blah blah. It was, back then it was tied to a smaller number of words, and I think the mental spell, the mental construction of this analog but very tight jail that people were forced to live in, so it could break with one word, one part of the whole hypnotic spell being rejected completely. Now I think it's much more nefarious. It's integrated with technology. It's a digital gulag, and it needs to. We need many of these many of these controlling words and concepts need to break. It's going to take longer. It's going to be more messy to a certain degree. It's going to be less clear. Like the breaking point is going to be less clear than this. But this is what happens when a fake civilization, when a spell that is cast on an organic natural culture breaks. This is what I'm going to be alive to be part of. Trying to appear magnanimous, Mielke responds, this is a natural humanistic question. This is just a question of formality. He's trying to backpedal like hell. Oh, I remember this. The chief of the DDR, I don't think they executed too many, but he came to power after the uprising of the workers, the actual workers' uprising of the DDR in, was it 53, was beat down upon in such a savage way. It was so bloody that, and it was so, they did such a thorough job that still to this day there is not too much that is known about it. And if I'm correct about 1953, it's 4 years before this guy became the head. He was certainly involved. If it was 56, it was a year before. He rose to the top after that event, which means that he was totally on the side that repressed and was ultimately responsible for the death of a lot of people and the like thousands of years of people staying in jail for no civilized reason at all. So that guy of all people finally tried. Ich liebe doch alle Menschen, ich liebe doch, ich setze mich doch dafür ein. I love all humanity, I really do, I'm committed to it. He was committed to humanity. I had no idea that it would be this interesting and this important when I started this just improvised live stream just to feed my channel with some content and burn some bridges then, and just get things out there. This was actually spread all over the place, and people remembered this moment, and the madness of this was remembered for years later. It was used in political arguments. It was used as this is something that should be remembered. Well, this broadcast remains the most famous broadcast in the history of German television. I wonder if it is banned now. I wonder. I might do some experiments with that. Because what do the similar services of the current Germany and the EU do? What are they doing now? I'm not going to go into this any further because there's some risk and reward thinking here, but yeah, in November 94, the judge ruled that he was not mentally competent to stand trial. Well, you don't want someone like that to talk too much, I guess. He might have been messed up because he was released from being totally confused, and it seems like they installed a red phone in his cell with no connection to the outside world, just so he could feel calm and sane. Yeah, there was a debate if they were too lenient or. It's in the past now, but it's also it's the present. This is the present. Just drawing any kind of direct comparison and typing that out in a YouTube title, and we'll probably get this channel banned, and maybe there's AI roaming everything and recording everything I say and do and match it with whatever tiny bit of flimsy pieces they have on my face up till now. I don't know. It's the same. There's no difference whatsoever. And here we are. I started with just planning a tiny rant on the Cold War. My point is that there is like a line of these lines through the history and how technology meets culture and how a culture deals with its own values. And this kind of thing I've studied since I was a teenager. It is always relevant, especially up against this totalitarian technology. And I totally understand people who do not dare to say a single thing or do a single thing. I totally understand that. I've been in that space for too long now. So there we go. as far as I understand, YouTube doesn't really register too much what is going on in the video. It's what you say and what you publish that counts. Let's see if this account gets nuked now or not. This guy is hilarious. One of the few members of the European Parliament that always ended his highly illegal, or whatever they call it. They call it illegal. They took his. Remember, they took his salary away and they tried to ban him in any kind of way they could, but he always ended his speeches with demanding that the European Union would be dissolved. Sometimes saying that it was a criminal entity or whatever. Yeah, he's a cool guy. Oh shit. If anyone want to do wild streams or Q&As or comments or whatever, I'm here for this fight, even if I get banned 1,000,000 times. I'm done with shying away, and it's just hilarious. Okay, that's it. Let's see what kind of fun keywords I can find here. If there's going to be any kind of views at all, doesn't matter. Good luck. You're gonna